Hi, I'm John Hornick. Welcome to Lesson 17 of Chef's Apprentice, Learning to Cook Like a Pro, one small plate at a time. This lesson is beef shabu shabu with wasabi mayonnaise and wild mushroom Nabemono. Now you're ready to prepare something special, essentially the graduation dish from the easy lessons of this course. Shabu shabu is a wonderful one-pot, audience participation beef and vegetable dish I learned on my first trip to Japan. We're just starting to see it in the US. Traditionally, highly marbled, very thin, and high quality pieces of beef are cooked at the table in a pot of hot water. In Japan, the cooking is done either by the guest or by a server dedicated to your table. The Japanese say shabu shabu describes the sound the beef makes when it plunges into the water, which becomes a broth as you cook. After the beef cooks for a few seconds, the guest eats it with chopsticks. When the beef is gone, vegetables are cooked in the now flavorful broth, or called Nabemono in Japanese. This is my version of shabu shabu, which uses the umami-rich Japanese stock called Dashi instead of plain water. This dish will make you a shabu shabu lover, as I am. Techniques today are chopping, making wasabi paste, slicing mushrooms, seasoning, bringing to a boil, simmering, making a broth, processing, pushing a sauce through a fine mesh strainer, making wasabi mayonnaise, and preparing an interactive dish to be cooked with your guests. So let's start. Okay, here we are to do our mise en place for lesson 17, which is beef shabu shabu with wasabi mayonnaise and a wild mushroom Nabemono. First we'll talk about our ingredients, and beef is the main ingredient here. This is prime ribeye beef, and in the description it says get this from your butcher. So go to your butcher, say you need the beef to be sliced carpaccio thin, or to be sliced about a 1/16 to an 1/8 of an inch thick and overlapped like this. So when it's presented, it's beautiful. You can also, if you have a slicer, you can freeze the beef, not rock solid frozen, but pretty frozen, and then slice it on your own slicer, and which is what I did here today to get this beautiful beef. Now this here is probably about 3 ounces, and so 3 to 4 ounces is what you would use for a small plate. In fact, I'd say around 3 ounces for a small plate. 4 to 5 ounces if you're serving it as a main course. Secondly, we're going to need some mayonnaise. Now, I'm going to be doing a lesson in my Sauces to Die For series on how to make mayonnaise and all the different things you can do with mayonnaise. But when I buy prepared mayonnaise, which I use for a lot of different things, I like to use the Kraft light mayonnaise. And I've gone ahead and I've put what we need, which is a cup of it. I put a cup of it already into the food processor bowl. We're also going to need about 2 tablespoons, no, I'm sorry, 2 cloves, 2 big cloves of 2 large cloves of garlic, finely chopped or minced. And we'll also need to have the juice of 1/2 of a lemon. We will also need some dashi. Now dashi is a standard Japanese stock. It's made with kombu, which is a type of seaweed, and also with dried bonito flakes. Bonito is a type of fish. And when they're dried, I think they smoke them, and the dried flakes are very smoky. And the 2 ingredients together, kombu and bonito flakes, make a great, very flavorful, umami-rich stock. Now I have a bonus video on how to make dashi. You can also buy the store-bought version. You can also buy a powder that you can mix with water. But this is Cook Like a Pro. Learn how to cook like a pro. So we're making it from scratch, and it's so easy to make. It takes only about 30 seconds to make it after you bring the water to a boil. So this is dashi. We'll need 1 quart of that. We're also going to need some wasabi paste. Now, to make wasabi paste, you take wasabi powder and you mix it with water. We're going to do that. Most wasabi powder that you get in the United States is actually not wasabi. It's horseradish mixed with green food coloring, and so that's what this one is here. This is actually horseradish. However, there's a company called SavorySpiceShop.com, SavorySpiceShop.com, and they have pure wasabi powder. So this is the real wasabi rhizome that you find in Japan. Hardly ever find it in the United States. So this has been ground into powder, and we're going to use this to make our wasabi paste. We'll also need to have some soy sauce, which in Japanese is called shoyu, S-H-O-Y-U. You can use a commodity soy sauce like the Kikkoman. It's the low sodium one if you like. I prefer to use something that a brand I like very much called Mitoku, M-I-T-O-K-U, which is sold by Natural Import Company, naturalimport.com. And this is a great shoyu. That's probably the one that we use today. If you want to add some more flavor to whatever you're doing, there are other options out there. There's this black garlic soy sauce made by a company called Haku, H-A-K-U. And that one, I hardly ever use that alone. But sometimes if a recipe calls for, say, 2 tablespoons of soy sauce, I might use 1 tablespoon of regular and 1 tablespoon of this. I also found this great soy sauce here, which is whiskey barrel aged. Mizunara, M-I-Z-U-N-A-R-A, shoyu. And that's from Umami Mart, UMAMIMART.com. But we're not going to use that today. I just thought I'd show you some of the options. We're also going to need some mirin, which is a sweet Japanese kind of a wine based on sake. And I like to use the Mitoku brand because it does not have any high fructose corn syrup in it. Okay? Also, we're going to need some Shaoxing. We've used this before. This is a Chinese sweet cooking wine. You can find this online. It doesn't have to be this brand. You can find it in an Asian grocery store. We're also going to need some stock. Now, I believe that the description calls for either chicken stock or shrimp stock. I have a bonus video on how to make duck stock, and the same process can be used to make virtually any kind of stock. How do you make shrimp stock? Save up shells from whenever you make shrimp. Save up the shells and the tails, especially the tails. They have a lot of flavor. I keep them until I have enough, and then I make shrimp stock. Same process as making the duck stock. Today we're going to use some chicken stock that I made. We'll need 1 cup of it. And now remember, this is learning to cook like a pro. So you should be making stocks. You should have stocks in your freezer ready to go when you need them. However, if you run short or if you just don't have the time, I did find this one brand, Swanson chicken stock, unsalted, and that's very important. A stock should never have salt in it because you're often reducing it. And when you reduce it, that concentrates flavors, and if there's salt in it, it concentrates the salt, makes it too salty. So if you're going to buy any store-bought stock, it should come either in the freezer section and be stock just like this, that probably the store made, and they froze it. It doesn't have any salt in it. Or buy this brand, which is unsalted. Okay. We're also going to need some parsley, just a little bit, a tablespoon or so. We're just going to use this to garnish the beef before we put them out in front of our guests. And we'll also need some sake. Any sake will do. I had this one in a can, but it doesn't need to be this brand. We will need, in the sake, we will need 1/2 of a cup, about 1/2 of a cup of sake. Okay. We'll also need just a little bit of white pepper. Why white pepper instead of black pepper? White pepper doesn't change the color of what you're putting it in. It just kind of disappears. We're only going to need about roughly 1/4 of a teaspoon of white pepper. Finally, we're going to need some wild mushrooms for the wild mushroom Nabemono. Now, you can buy assorted mushrooms at the grocery store, but I actually found these at Whole Foods. This is Phillips Gourmet. They have baby bellas, shiitake, and oyster mushrooms in there. So it's a nice combination. You don't have to use a combination. You could just use cremini mushrooms. You could use white mushrooms. You could also use shiitake, but I'd recommend something a little bit more exotic, like the shiitake or the oyster, because this is a Japanese dish. And as you can see, when these were sliced, they're sliced about, I'd say about 1/4 of an inch thick, and they left the stems on them. Now what I will do if I buy the mushrooms is I'll take the stems off, save them up until I have enough to make mushroom stock, and I'll just use the mushroom caps. One thing I am going to do with these mushrooms is I'm going to go in and I'm going to take any of them that are any more than 1/4 of an inch thick. In fact, any that are 1/4 of an inch thick, I'm going to slice them in half so they're only 1/8 of an inch thick. So when you slice your mushrooms, you only want them to be about 1/8 of an inch thick. We're going to break now, and I will come back and show you the equipment that we'll need for this lesson. Okay, let's talk about the equipment that we'll need for lesson 17. First, of course, we'll need our prep list, as we always do. And we're going to need a cutting board and a chef's knife, as we almost always do. We'll need a juicer so that we can strain the lemon juice that we'll need for this preparation. We're going to need a small bowl and spoon for making the wasabi paste. We're also going to need a pot that's suitable for presentation to your guests, because the way Shabu Shabu works is you're going to put this pot in front of your guests with the broth that we're going to make in the pot. Heat it up, and the guests are going to cook that beef that you saw earlier in this broth. They're going to do it themselves. So you want something that's suitable for serving to people, showing to people, putting out in front of them. I like this this cast iron Dutch oven that I found in a thrift store, because it reminds me of some of the old ironware that I've seen in Japan and that you'll sometimes see in samurai movies or in photographs of old Japan. So we'll need a pot like that. Also, the cast iron holds its heat really well. We'll also need to have a food processor. Now, I've already put the mayonnaise into the food processor bowl, so this is the motor. It does not need to be a real big one, because we're only making about a cup of this wasabi mayonnaise. We'll also need a strainer. We'll be straining the wasabi mayonnaise through the strainer. And we'll be pushing it through the strainer with a rubber spatula or a wooden spoon. Sometimes one works better than the other. We'll have to see which one is working better on this particular preparation. We'll be doing a lot of pushing things through strainers in this course to get them perfectly smooth. And one thing you can use for that is this strainer with a food mill in it. I have never seen one of these in the United States. I bought this in Europe. I don't know if you can get them here or not, but it has a blade that goes down right on the mesh screen, and you turn it, and as it turns, the blade pushes the food through the strainer. It's great. It works so fast, but I have not found one of those in the United States. We will also need to have a butane burner like this. This is what the pot will go on in front of your guests. It takes butane cans like this. If you have only, say, 3 or 4 guests, one of these will be enough. If you have 6 or say 8 guests, you'll need to have 2 of these burners. Very inexpensive. You can find them in hardware stores and of course online. Then, for purposes of serving, we're going to need a soup bowl, because after the guests have cooked the beef in the broth and they've eaten the beef, then they're going to we're going to ladle the broth into the bowls, and they're going to eat it like soup. Now, I'm using these cast iron bowls because they hold the heat really well. Also, they have a real Japanese feel to them, but you can use any kind of a soup bowl, preferably one that's deeper rather than real wide, but it doesn't really matter that much. We'll also need a soup spoon for eating, and then we'll also need a little dish to put the wasabi mayonnaise in. And these are great. These had cheese in them when I bought them at Whole Foods. It was a little container filled with the soft cheese. So if you buy that 6 or 8 times, then you've got a whole set of these little containers that you can use for dipping sauces. We'll also need chopsticks. Now, chopsticks, if they are round and come to a wider point, or if they're square, they're Chinese. If they are pointed, and by the way, they're not Thai. Thais don't use chopsticks. If they are pointed, they are Japanese chopsticks. So we'll be using Japanese chopsticks tonight. And finally, we will need to have a ladle to ladle the broth into the bowls. Now, one other thing you may want to have is just a little plate to go in front of your guests. After they put the beef into the broth, they'll cook it in the broth for a few seconds. Then they'll take it out and they'll eat it. Now, you may want to have a little plate down in front of them so they can sit it on the plate, or they can eat part of it and put the rest on the plate. It's probably a good thing to do. Okay, so that is all of the equipment that we'll need for lesson 17. I'll break now, and I'll come back and we'll start cooking. Okay, let's check our prep list. We've already chopped the parsley, and we've already minced the garlic. Put the parsley in the fridge because we're going to use that to garnish the beef a little bit later.
And we've also gotten the juice of half of lemon. And now we're going to make the wasabi paste. Now, the important thing about making wasabi paste is to 1-to-1 ratio. Now, the description calls, I believe, for 2 teaspoons of wasabi powder to 2 teaspoons of water. You can use any measurement you want, but it's 1-to-1. So I've used about, well, actually, I did measure this. This is 2 teaspoons of wasabi powder. We're going to put in 2 teaspoons of water, and then use your spoon and mix that up until you have a uniform paste without lumps. Okay, then we want to add that to the food processor. So we're going to bring in the food processor here. We can use our spoon, but also we're going to use this little spatula to get this wasabi paste down into the food processor. And get all of it. That's why we're using the spatula. Taste what's on the spoon. You'll see it has a different flavor than what you're used to getting in wasabi in most Japanese restaurants. Then we're going to add the garlic to the food processor, and we're going to add the lemon juice. Put on the top and process it until it is smooth. Sometimes it helps to take the lid off, scrape down the sides of the bowl. Sometimes it helps to pulse rather than to do a continuous process. So we want to process it to get it as fine as we can. Try to get that garlic to be as pulverized as possible, because we're going to strain it, and we don't want to leave any more of the garlic in the strainer than we have to. We want it to go through into our mayonnaise. So take our blade, get as much of it off the blade as we can, and get the mayonnaise out of the bowl. Now, could you use this with the lumps in it, with the whatever little garlic lumps there are left? Yes, you could. It's not as refined, okay? And now, that may be your choice, though, in a particular preparation. You could choose that you want to leave the garlic lumps in there. Now, I think for a refined presentation like we're doing tonight, cooking like a pro, we want it to be perfectly smooth. We don't want those lumps to be in there. But to some extent, that's an aesthetic choice, your choice to make. All right, now what we want to do is use our spatula and press the mayonnaise through the strainer. Now you'll see that there's garlic that's left in the strainer. Now what I'm going to try to do is use the spoon and see if I can press some of that garlic through. Now, what am I doing when I do that? Well, I'm causing those garlic pieces to be smaller because they're being pressed through the strainer. And look, I think I've gotten all of the garlic through there. Now you have some on the bottom. What do you do with that? Well, you don't want to wipe it off with the spatula the way it is, because that has lumpy garlic on it. You want to rinse that off and then go on to the bottom of the strainer. Now this isn't just a matter of not being wasteful. It is partly that. But it's also, as I've explained before, sometimes you get a whole person's serving out of what you can scrape out of a bowl or off the bottom of a strainer with a spatula like this. Okay, so that is our mayonnaise. That is ready to go. That is ready to be plated. Okay, so let's check our prep list. We have made the wasabi paste. We have processed the mayo with the garlic and the lemon juice and the wasabi powder, and we've strained it. Now we're going to do the broth. So we're going to break and meet back at the stove. Okay, here we are at the stove. I've already put the 1 quart of dashi into the serving kettle that we're going to be using, which is a cast iron Dutch oven. Now what we want to do is bring to a boil. Remember, bring to a boil means bringing it up to a boil, and just when it gets to a boil, you reduce the heat. You may be reducing it to a simmer or to warm. In this particular case, we're going to be reducing it to simmer. So what we want to do is we want to add the other ingredients. Sorry, knocked the camera there a little bit. Let's reposition. Okay. I want to bring the other ingredients to a boil with the dashi. So we're going to be adding 2 tablespoons of soy sauce. Does it have to be, knocked the camera again, sorry. Does it have to be a precise measurement? No. You may find that you like a little bit more of the soy sauce, a little bit less, but this is a proportion that's worked for me, so that's what we're using today. That was 2 tablespoons of soy sauce. In a 1-to-1 ratio, 2 tablespoons of mirin. Okay, so I find that they balance each other really well, so if you are going to use different measurements, use 1-to-1, basically, same amount of soy sauce as mirin. We're going to add 1 cup of stock. This is chicken stock. You could use shrimp stock, you could use mushroom stock, you could even use lobster stock. Okay, then we're going to add the sake. We're going to use a 1/2 cup of sake, and we're going to use a 1/2 cup of Shaoxing. Those, again, they're in a 1-to-1 ratio. The same amount of sake that you use is the amount of Shaoxing that you use, and you may find that you want a little bit more, a little bit less, but I think they work well in a 1-to-1 ratio. Then we want to add 1 cup of water, and that's in the same ratio as the stock, 1-to-1. Okay. Right. And then finally, we want to add about 1/4 teaspoon of white pepper, and that's about 1/4 teaspoon. Okay. Stir it up. The nice thing about that white pepper is it just disappeared into the broth. It doesn't leave flecks of black like you would get if you had used ground black pepper. Now we want to bring that to a boil and then reduce it to a simmer. Okay, so the broth has just come to a boil. We're going to reduce it to low heat and simmer it uncovered for 10 minutes. Why uncovered, and why are we simmering it? We're doing that to burn off the alcohol in the mirin and the sake and the Shaoxing. All right, so we're going to let that simmer for 10 minutes. After the simmering, we're going to cover it and keep it on low heat until we're ready to serve. So, the next thing you're going to see on this video is some photos of the beef being garnished with the parsley, with everything presented to the guests, with the guests doing a little cooking of the shabu shabu in the broth and the bowls of broth. Okay, that was lesson 17. Beef shabu shabu with wasabi mayonnaise and wild mushroom nabemono. Just as a recap, we did some chopping today. We also made wasabi paste. We brought a broth to a boil. We simmered it, and we made a broth. We also did some processing, some straining through a wire mesh sieve. we made the sauce, which was the wasabi mayonnaise, and we prepared and we presented an interactive dish. You can see photos of the dish as it was presented and as it was being enjoyed by the guests on my Instagram at Chef's Apprentice Cook Like a Pro. Next up is going to be our first dish of medium difficulty. You've graduated from the easy dishes. And that first dish is asparagus rafts with an herbed chev or herbed goat cheese. Please remember to subscribe to my channel, and thanks for watching.